Okay, well, welcome everyone to week number 4 for MPA 540. We have two primary topics we cover this week. One topic is compensation, and the second topic is employee engagement. So I thought I'd put together a brief video just seeing the highlights of some of those important parts of those topics, and then kind of introduce you to some of the things that you'll be reading about in your assigned work for this week. So let's start with a brief discussion of compensation. And we know compensation is an extremely important topic for all organizations. Effective compensation systems must be aligned with both organizational as well as individual objectives. And probably from your time in an MPA program, you understand the concept of goal congruence and how we try to find congruence between individual and organizational goals. Well, here our compensation system must be congruent with both those individual as well as those organizational goals. And also to have an effective compensation system, we also need to have a valid methodology that we are using to assign salary and benefits to the different positions within our organization. The more valid and the more transparent the methodology we use, the more likely it is that our employees are going to accept the results of that compensation process. We do know that it can be an uncomfortable process to go through assigning compensation because we are making comparisons between different positions and people doing the same job, which obviously can result in some hurt feelings. We also know that any compensation system we develop needs to be value added. It needs to add value for both the organization as well as the employees. A good compensation system will be useful in attracting new employees to the organization. It will be successful in rewarding and retaining your existing employees to reduce employee turnover rates. It'll be important in establishing that equity balance in terms of compensation, both an internal as well as an external compensation equity balance, internal to the organization, and then the positions within the organization as they then compare to positions in other organizations throughout the rest of the labor force. And then we also know that our compensation system also must be in alignment with our budgetary restraints and our budgetary requirements. And our compensation system can really serve as a budget control type of device. Now, a good compensation system will be predicated on both equity as well as expectancy theory. With equity theory, we're talking about the balance between the contributions made by the individual and the rewards that individual receives from the organization. This harkens back in organization theory literature to Chester Barnard and Chester Barnard's idea of compliance. And that's important for managers in order to be successful to offer the right set of incentives to their employees to extract the right set of contributions that will help achieve organizational goals and objectives. So that equity, and this is, Adams is another author who talks a lot about this equity theory, that employees really need to look at the contributions that are given to the organization and balance those with the things that they are being asked to do in order to find that balance between contributions and rewards. And then it's also predicated upon expectancy theory from Vroom, and we spoke at length about expectancy theory in a previous video. But expectancy theory is predicated upon expectancies, instrumentalities, and valences. As we talked about in the previous video, expectancy is a feeling on the part of the employee that if they put forth a certain amount of effort, it will lead to a certain level of performance or productivity. Instrumentality is the belief that managers and leaders of the organization will make good on their promises in terms of the compensation received for achieving that level of performance or productivity. And then the valence level, obviously, is the value that the employee attaches to those desired results, to that compensation that they are receiving. So we have to make sure our compensation systems are in alignment with both equity as well as Vroom's expectancy theory. So how do we do it? How do we determine compensation in our organizations? Well, one way in which we can determine compensation is pay philosophy. So law and policy will inform for us certain ways in which you have to compensate certain types of positions, things such as equal pay for equal work. That comes directly from enabling legislation from law and policy. The labor markets will have an input on our compensation system as well on determining what we pay our employees. We need to remain competitive with these external organizations, these external entities. The job content, the actual internal components of the job itself that we discover through our job analysis and through our job evaluation that we talked about in a previous video, that will also be used in order to help us determine the compensation for given positions. And then individual considerations. So resource allocation for specific types of positions, things such as cost of living adjustments, longevity, which is indexed to the seniority of that individual in the organization, merit increases, pay for certain types of skills that have been acquired, bonus pay, differential pay. All those considerations are more individually based upon certain people, certain positions, and certain types of situations that people find themselves in. Obviously, the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938 forms a strong baseline for the expectations of working a 5-day work week and working a 40-hour work week. Now, we also know that a lot of organizations become very creative, especially in the COVID and post-COVID era, in terms of coming up with flex time, coming up with flex locations, and trying to provide a lot more flexibility to employees in terms of the way in which those jobs are structured. We'll talk about those flexibility mechanisms later on in this video, but offering those flexibility mechanisms obviously can be a substitute for your traditional wage-based types of compensation. The philosophy behind a compensation system can be predicated on a wage lead approach, whereby you have a high quality satisfied workforce, which then reduces the cost per unit of output because it's an efficient, well-paid workforce. If you pay your employees well, they'll be more efficient, they'll be more effective. It could be predicated upon a wage competitive approach. In a wage competitive approach, it neutralizes compensation as a factor in recruitment and retention by really accentuating those benefits and those non-monetary types of amenities. So when you recruit people, your primary attractiveness as an organization is not the compensation, the money itself, but rather the benefits and all these non-monetary types of amenities. Then there's a wage follower approach, which emphasizes unique characteristics of the occupation and again dictates that service is not about making money, that money is not a primary motivator for people to be attracted to positions within those organizations. So lead, match, or lag type of philosophy that an organization can adopt. Whatever philosophy you adopt needs to be directly related to a lot of different factors that are oftentimes idiosyncratic to that position and to that organization. So things such as the types of skills required, the characteristics in the job market, the ability of the organization to pay, what resources they have to fund this compensation, the desired image of the institution, assumptions about the work attitudes of employees and then employer ideologies. And so this is really that it depends type of answer, but the philosophy you use to underpin your compensation system really depends upon the situation in which you find yourself as an organization with given positions. Obviously, the labor market will have an impact upon compensation, primarily external competition. So how much competition is there from other organizations for that adequate supply of labor? Obviously, the more competition, the higher you'll have to compensate applicants in order to attract them to your organization. The way in which we determine the differential markets is usually benchmarked through using something like the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the BLS will provide you with a lot of good data to help you assess what a current going rate is for this type of position within the broader and more general labor market. Obviously, that gives you a standard to work from, but even though positions may be similar, there are going to be some differences in terms of the actual duties of a job in the organization as compared to outside the organization. So there are a lot of other factors to be considered as well, but at least the Bureau of Labor Statistics can give you that baseline for understanding compensation in your external job market. Also, we really need to base compensation upon the idiosyncratic characteristics of that job itself. And so we get to those characteristics of the job itself through our job analysis and our job evaluation, as we discussed in that previous video. The job evaluation is really required and really serves as the bedrock for determining the values of jobs and then assigning compensation to those different positions. It's very important we do a good job of job analysis and job evaluation so that we can maintain that internal equity within our organization of equal pay for equal types of work. When we've identified the characteristics of the job and then we assign compensation, we then engage in this thing called pay banding, and we talked about that in the video last week as well, whereby we create these pay bands to make sure that positions within the same grade and within the same band and are compensated at the same amount. Again, this is your whole idea of comparable worth and that theory of equity. We also have to consider some individual considerations to establish that fairness between our current and our future employees. We know that the value of money changes over time. And so we know that as we are employing new people and bringing people in the future, we need to make sure that we're not bringing them in at such a high salary that it serves as a disincentive for people who may have been hired 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So we want to try and find some equity and some fairness between what our current employees are getting and what future employees will be getting as well. So there are basically 6 different approaches we can use in order to try and create this fairness between current and future employees. One step is obviously a COLA, a cost of living adjustment. And so if you provide these COLAs on an annual basis to your employees, obviously that will increase their compensation to try and help them keep up with inflation and the changes in the value of money, so that when you do bring new employees in, at least those current employees have had those COLAs throughout the years to at least make them a little bit more equal to what those new employees are being paid. Longevity pay to reward those employees with seniority who have been in the organization for a long time. Again, providing that longevity pay helps equal out the pay of current and future employees. Merit-based pay. So this is a performance-based increment to your base salary, which compounds as long as the employee remains with the department. So you provide a merit pay increase, that's what we call on schedule. That on schedule merit pay increase then adds to that base salary. And so any future increases will be added onto that new base as compared to the base that they originally started with. So this merit pay, the important thing about it is it compounds over the years. Merit pay is something that a lot of employees would like to see, but a lot of unions are very hesitant to sign off on merit pay in collective bargaining agreements for the concerns of, again, those equity types of concerns. The proper work environment is required in order for achievement-based performance and compensation to flourish, meaning that we have to have a strong organization culture. We have to have supervisors who are committed to equity and to fairness. We have to have a rigorous performance appraisal system. We have to have a good, strong system of checks and balances, and we have to have an ongoing system for program evaluation. We really need to have all those things in place before a merit pay system is going to work. And again, even if we have all those things in place and unions are still hesitant to sign off on merit pay because they're concerned it might be a slippery slope in terms of pay for performance, it's going to be difficult to implement that in an organization. But merit pay is just another way in which we can find that equity and the equality between current and future employees. So pay for performance programs tend to be very good in principle, but as I said, they're much more difficult to execute. And one of the worst things that can happen with a pay for performance program is if the organization promises pay for performance, and then once that performance is achieved, that pay is then not delivered. That would be a violation of that instrumentality aspect of Vroom's expectancy theory. And that's exactly what we saw with the Senior Executive Service that was created under Civil Service Reform Act. Congress made the promise for this type of performance pay and then failed to deliver on it. That then erodes the trust between the employee and the organization. Another approach is skill-based pay. When an incumbent employee learns new skills and utilizes those skills and demonstrates the results of utilizing those skills, they would then qualify for incremental skill pay. So we attach the increase in compensation to the acquisition and the use of these new skills. Again, that's good as long as people are developing skills that are necessary, that the people are developing skills that are useful to the organization. So they're not just going out there and getting professional development and developing skills just to get paid more money. Bonus programs, bonus pay, a little bit different than merit pay, but bonus pay is awarded on individual productivity. These are, again, performance-based rewards, and they can result from the distribution of savings of the organization, such as something like gain sharing, where all the benefits are dispersed to either individuals in the work group or the group's budget, meaning that this bonus pay is oftentimes given to people within units, people within departments, people within work groups, whenever those units, departments, or work groups achieve a certain level of performance. So typically when we're looking at bonus types of programs, we're looking at providing people within a unit extra pay if that unit performs very well and achieves its goals and its objectives. Again, the problem with bonus pay is if you don't carry through on these promises of bonus pay, you violate instrumentality, which obviously will then lead to lower levels of effort, lower levels of motivation for employees. Differential pay is another strategy, additional pay for special work conditions. So if you work in a different location, you may get paid a different amount because of having to travel to that different location. If you're working in a location that could be a dangerous type of setting to work in, you could be paid extra for that. Overtime pay, allowances, the costs imposed by employment. So if you have to do some type of training in order to do this job, you can get differential pay for the cost of that training. So to wrap up this really brief discussion of compensation, compensation is obviously very important to organizations because it can, if done correctly, can create equity and create equality. The problem with compensation is it's difficult to do, and it's predicated upon having the resources in order to afford this compensation. Again, the worst thing that can happen is a violation of instrumentality. If compensation is done correctly, then compensation can motivate employees, compensation can make employees feel more valued by the organization, and can make the organization much more competitive with other organizations in the environment in the more general labor market. Again, any compensation system that is developed must be developed in accordance with the characteristics of the organization and the organization's unique organizational culture. So what elements influence compensation and pay determination? As we had mentioned before, labor markets are very important. Job evaluation to determine the internal consistency of the functions within those positions. Some individual considerations such as COLAs, longevity pay, merit pay, skill-based pay, differential pay. The type of philosophy that underpins that compensation system, and as always, laws and policies. So we make sure that whatever compensation system we're using will be in accordance not just with laws, but also with collective bargaining agreements. And in addition to compensation, a second topic that we're covering this week are those employee-friendly policies, leave policies, things such as that, that again can enhance the motivation of employees within an organization. When we develop employee-friendly policies, leave policies and childcare policies, we have to do so in recognition of the general changes to the demographics of our workforce. We know that we have more females in the workforce than we've ever had in the past. We know that we have more millennials in the workforce, and we're starting to see Gen Z employees entering into the workforce, replacing those baby boomers. And so now the senior generation we oftentimes see in the workforce are those Gen Xers. And in our video last week, we talked about the impact of different generations in how we manage and how we lead individuals. So some of the employee-friendly programs that we can put in place in order to address the work-family conflicts that many of our employees are facing are things such as child care programs, elder care programs, parental and military leave programs, adoption assistance programs, domestic partner coverage, all programs we can put in place to try and deal with some of these conflicts and some of these tensions that arise for our employees as they try and balance their work life with their personal life. And I'm sure a lot of your organizations have these types of programs in place, so we can just cover them very, very quickly, because I would assume you're probably familiar with how your organizations implement these programs. But the vast majority of organizations will have some type of a child care program in place, either provision of child care facilities, sometimes financial assistance and subsidies to help pay for child care, resources and referral services for the provision of child care for in the event of ill children or emergency child care, flexible benefits, flex time and flex place in order to, again, allow people more of an opportunity to care for their children, parental leave policies, and partnering with and investing in community resources for the provision of child care. A lot of organizations have begun offering elder care programs as well. These sandwich generations that are not only dealing with child care, but they're also having to deal with the care of aging parents. And so in terms of elder care programs, sometimes organizations will offer things such as social work counseling, financial assistance, subsidies to service providers for the provision of elder care services, leave policies to provide for leave for the caring of an elderly family member, information referral services and sources, and support groups for employees who are in the same situation in dealing with elderly parents or elderly relatives. Elder care programs become more and more popular in the public sector. More than half of city and municipal employers have some type of an elder care program offered to their employees, which is far more than we tend to see in the private sector, where only about 1/3 of private sector businesses currently offer those types of elder care programs. Another type of program provided to employees to help with that work-life balance, parental leave. And we're all familiar with the Family and Medical Leave Act and the provisions of that really expanded parental leave across the country, both in the public as well as the private sector. 60% of the US labor force are currently covered by the FMLA. And more than 50 million Americans have used the FLMA since 1993. Despite that, the US still tends to lag behind the rest of the world in terms of paid maternity leave. California was very much on the forefront of this parental leave in 2002. We also have leave for military personnel, which is protected by federal and state law through the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act of 1994. There are costs obviously associated with leave programs. There are costs associated before the leave occurs in the terms of absenteeism and the impact of absenteeism on productivity. There are costs incurred during the planning for this program and securing and training potential replacements. Also during the leave itself, there are costs incurred through disability pay. While you're staffing, you have costs for temps and replacement costs and paying overtime for other employees who then do the work that's not currently being done by the person who's on leave. And then after the leave ends, there are also costs associated with retraining, re-onboarding, and potentially some possible turnover costs if those individuals then do not return after their leave has expired. Another type of program that we see organizations offering more and more today is adoption assistance. And we have 52% of large US employers offer some type of financial adoption assistance, and that number is increasing, that percentage has increased in recent years. So it's becoming much more common to see adoption assistance. We tend to see that more at the state level in private organizations than we do at the local level, primarily because of the costs that are associated with it. Domestic partner coverage, another type of program that is more frequently being offered by organizations. You can see the numbers, and these numbers have actually increased over the past couple of years, but state governments that provide it, local governments that provide it, Fortune 500 companies that provide it, and the top 125 colleges and universities, 75 of those 125 colleges and universities offer domestic partner coverage. Health, safety, wellness programs, offering health programs and safety programs to try and keep your employees healthy and keep your employees on the job. Obviously, there are some challenges to providing these types of programs in terms of accessibility, the amount of the range of activities that organization has the resources to offer. Privacy sometimes becomes a big issue with things like employee assistance programs and just how protected that information is when an employee participates in counseling through an EAP. And it's important for organizations to know that they're going to get a measurable return on their investment for the cost that they're spending on these programs. 4 initiatives that typify a balanced health, safety, and wellness program: stress reduction, wellness programs, safety initiatives, and employee assistance programs, or EAPs. We know that stress is an important thing to manage for our employees and to help our employees manage their stress. 64% of local governments and 52% of private sector employers have some type of stress reduction programs that they offer to their employees. More than 10 million people in the workforce are said to suffer from these stress-related types of problems. Welfare programs, obviously, to try and alter and mitigate unhealthy personal habits and lifestyles, to try and promote behaviors that are conducive to health and well-being, to try and reduce loss of productivity, to try and reduce rates of absenteeism. These programs are available in 63% of state and local governments and 39% of private sector employers as well. The organizational benefit, obviously, for a stress reduction and a wellness program, it follows a consistent management style in that it allows for more organizational harmony. Whenever you have people who are less stressed and are more apt and more likely to show up to work, you have to ensure that tasks are well-defined and responsibilities are clearly articulated in order to have an effective wellness and safety program. And it will also promote career development and career security, that people are not worried about losing their job if they encounter any of these issues in the future. There are also safety initiative programs, and some of these safety initiative programs are required by law. And so depending on your position, your organization, you may have annual safety training that you have to do. And again, that's oftentimes required by OSHA regulations. And then employee assistance programs, or EAPs. Employee assistance programs are designed to improve employee health and assist the employee in coping with personal problems. Again, one of the big questions with an EAP is who has access to that information? How can we keep that information confidential? And many employees are a little hesitant to participate in an EAP for fear that any information they disclose in the process of participation will then be disclosed to their employer and could then have an adverse impact upon their future employability. Also, it's difficult sometimes because of that to then incentivize people to take advantage of these EAP types of counseling services. Components of employers' comprehensive EAP typically consists of counseling and referral for both employees as well as their families, and the provision of a staff with a good, solid clinical background and provide knowledge of providers that they can refer employees and family members to, which means rigorous reference checks for all service providers who participate in the EAP. Confidentiality, as we said before, is extremely important with these types of programs, and adequate training is important, not just for the employees to know about these programs, but also for supervisors and managers to know how to protect the rights of their employees when they do choose to participate in these types of programs. Some other employee-friendly policies that we tend to see involve flexible work arrangements. And we really see a great increase in this after the COVID pandemic. And now everyone's familiar with Zoom and everyone's familiar with remote work, perhaps a lot more so than they used to be before the COVID pandemic. But there are some real tangible types of policies we can put in place to afford flexibility and latitude to our employees. Flex option, telecommuting, part-time work, voluntary reduced time, temporary work, leave sharing, and job sharing. Again, just some of those types of options. With a flex option, we allow for differentials in starting and quitting times. still mandate a required number of hours to be completed in a work cycle, but those hours can be completed at different times than Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. So some flex scheduling. A compressed work week, where the number of hours worked per week is condensed into fewer days. We've seen a lot of organizations go to 4-day and sometimes even 3-day work weeks. Same number of hours, same type of productivity is meant to be done, but it's just done in a fewer number of days per week. Telecommuting, which is very common today after COVID, that 45 million number has greatly increased and has probably tripled since the COVID pandemic. And now where it used to be an underutilized benefit, I think now it is something that is utilized very, very much by organizations. The problem, obviously, is a lot of organizations are struggling with the question of how and when and why should they bring people back onto campus? When should they bring people onto the physical site? And there's some resistance. Employees have gotten used to telecommuting over the past couple of years, and they're resistant to going back to the physical site. And the question then becomes, is there an increase in productivity having people in person as compared to having people working remotely? And that's a question that a lot of organizations are struggling with right now. Obviously, telecommuting provides a lot more flexibility, can increase the productivity of employees, can save employees money in terms of saving in gas and saving in transportation and sometimes parking fees, and can increase employee satisfaction. Obviously, the disadvantages of telecommuting, you have a loss of management control. Sometimes there are problems with office coverage, is that you need to keep your office open from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. And if the majority of your employees are telecommuting, you literally don't have the people in place in order to keep those offices open. Scheduling of meetings can be difficult, especially if people are participating from different types of time zones, and some stakeholder resistance, and that some people just do not want to work online and prefer to work in person. Part-time work, so providing an incentive for your employees to work fewer than 35 hours per week. We have a lot of people who do part-time work in this country. It's very attractive if you're a new parent. The disadvantage, obviously, is the lack of benefits that part-time employees oftentimes receive as compared to full-time employees. Voluntary reduced work time. Employees voluntarily reduce their work hours and their compensation. A lot of universities will have what's called a faculty early retirement program. And the faculty early retirement program, employees will agree to work less and to work maybe half time as opposed to working their full teaching schedule. The advantages, obviously, you reduce your labor costs as an employer, and employees are better able to address caregiving responsibilities and have a little bit more flexibility, and maybe can avoid a layoff by accepting these reduced hours on a voluntary basis. Leave sharing, a lot of organizations will have catastrophic leave sharing whereby the employees can share their leave balances with other employees who are going through a catastrophic life event. Tends to be much more prevalent in federal and state governments than what we see in private sector or organizations. And then job sharing. Now, I used to serve on a school board, and we had a lot of job sharing that went on with teachers, where employees would split the responsibilities, hours, and salary, and oftentimes the benefits of a full-time position. So you might have a 50-50 job share, or a 70-30 job share, or an 80-20 job share. I've even seen a 90-10 type of job share. So a lot of different manifestations of job shares that, again, allow for those flexible types of arrangements for employees. Advantages is a solution to severe financial restraints, reduction of absenteeism. It's a tool that you can use to heighten productivity. That if someone just cannot work their job more than 30%, this job share allows them to remain employed with the organization. The disadvantage is you have to work really hard at an equitable distribution of benefits. When you've got someone working at 70% and someone working at 30%, the compensation, the salary is pretty easy to divide 70 to 30. The benefits become a little bit messier when you try and divide up by percentages. And so how you arrange the benefits can be a real consideration. How are promotion opportunities identified? And so that person working that 30% of that job, do they have the same equal opportunity for promotion as the person who's working the 70%, or someone else who's not in a job share who's working 100%? And then what impact does that then have on employee seniority? So how does an organization design a program that satisfies and supports the needs and goals of both the organization as well as the employee? Well, one step in doing that is the creation of a comprehensive needs assessment. Secondly, the workforce demographic should be developed. You need to know your employees. You need to know what your employees need and what they desire. Every employee is different. So you want to design programs that meet the needs of your employees. And obviously, you want to conduct some type of a cost benefit analysis so you can quantify the cost of the program with the benefits of the program. And when you quantify the cost of the program, you also have to include in there, as you would in any cost benefit analysis, the opportunity cost. And the opportunity cost is the cost that you could be spending this money on something else other than this program. So what are you losing out on by funding this program? And so a good, thorough cost benefit analysis is often required. So the organizations that are usually cited as being the best places to work are those organizations that tend to have a good, robust spectrum of employee-related programs that they offer. And I think I mentioned to you in a previous video, the federal government every single year tries to measure this with their employee engagement survey, where they ask employees how engaged they are and you know, how worthwhile is their work at this given organization. And the highest scores at the federal level tend to come from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, otherwise known as NASA. NASA tends to get very, very high ratings from their employees. Department of Commerce tends to perform very well as well. And for a large organization, because the study breaks it up according to size of the organization, for a large organization, Department of Health and Human Services as well. Typically, as we had talked about in the previous video, whenever people talk about their organizations being the best place to work, there's a strong correlation between the size of the organization and how satisfied employees are with that organization. Smaller organizations tend to be ranked higher in terms of satisfaction as compared to those larger types of organizations. So the big so what question here is, do these employee-friendly policies work? Do they work well enough to justify the cost that employers are putting into these programs? Data tends to indicate that employee-friendly policies and programs are effective at attracting and retaining staff. Organizations that have good employee-friendly policies and programs tend to have an easier job hiring, and they tend to have lower attrition rates than organizations without those policies and those programs. We tend to see increases in job satisfaction, decreases in absenteeism, increases in productivity, increases in morale, again, an easier time recruiting new employees, retaining those new employees, and keeping those employees loyal to the organization. So in terms of the so what is they do tend to work if they are designed appropriately and are designed to match the characteristics of the organization. Some of the challenges is selecting the right programs to offer. So sometimes we offer a lot of programs, we're not offering the right programs to match the wants, needs, and desires of our employees. Sometimes it's difficult in this cost benefit analysis to really quantify the return on investment. So we know the costs associated with providing the program, but sometimes that ROI can really be elusive for us, in that it's difficult to quantify all those benefits that we are getting from these employee-friendly types of programs. And the amount of executive support obviously is going to have a big impact upon the success of these programs as well. If executive level leaders and managers don't support these employee-friendly programs, then obviously they are going to be doomed to being a failure. But overall, the more organizations are able to provide the right set of employee-friendly policies and programs for their employees and make their employees' wants, needs, and desires, the more effective that organization can be. But again, this week, in your readings, you'll go through a lot of these different programs that we've talked about so far here in the video, and some details on all of those programs. And as you do your reading, you'll think about your organization and what programs your organization has in place that you would deem to be employee-friendly types of programs. That's it for this video for this week. If you have any questions on the material, as always, feel free to reach out. Send me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And now I'll follow up with a video looking specifically at the 2 assignments that you have here in the class for week number 4.